I'm going to start with that discovery process because it really is the backbone of what we do. Question that we often get is, what data do you need at my institution? And the answer is we collect a fairly comprehensive set of indicators at your campus. We break it down into profile data, operating data, and financial data. Everything from building inventory featuring construction dates and some characteristics, deferred maintenance list, staffing table, work order reports, utility information. We also like things like institutional financial statements, operating expenditures, capital expenditures, and so on. Our goal is not to take a lot of your staff's time. So we work with you ahead of time to make sure that everybody understands our needs when we come to campus. And 9 times out of 10, the reports that you already have, the information that you already have assembled in some form or another, satisfies our needs for each of these items. Where it does not exist, we oftentimes take it upon ourselves. You know, that's our job, not yours. If it means we need to look through a box full of utility bills, well, that's what we do. If it means we have to assemble the budget from different departmental reports, that's what we do. Our goal is to work with you and not to take up too much of your staff's valuable time. The first thing that we do after we collect this is figure out who's your peer group, who's your comp group. Essentially, if we're going to do a exercise with benchmarking as a component, we want to know who we need to compare you to. Well, we start with looking very simply at size of institution, program of your institution or your research university versus a liberal arts college. Where do the students oftentimes apply as well? We're looking at location because that's important. The East Coast, West Coast, and in between all have unique operating needs. But we typically go beyond that. You know, we're looking very specifically. Are there campuses that are technically very similar to yours? You know, a campus that's made up of lots of different high-tech laboratories, facilities, has fundamentally different facilities needs than those that are not, that are more classroom, liberal arts oriented. We look at density factor. You want to know that, you know, there's about the same mix of number of students to number of square feet. We also want to look at what we're calling ground intensity, and that goes to scale. Am I a campus of few very large buildings versus a campus of hundreds of smaller standalone spaces? That affects maintenance, and we want to make sure that we're developing an appropriate comparative comp group when we start the exercise. So we talked about the fact that ROPA Plus helps to join concepts of space, capital, and operations. So I want to go through each of those and basically say what we collect and why. On the space side, we're collecting square footage, construction dates, renovation history, functional descriptions, utility information, etc. We're trying to look at age profile, functional profile. We're looking at density. We're looking at technical capacity. Well, why? Well, sometimes simplest measures can tell you the most about your institution. And so we're looking to answer a couple of core questions when we look at space. Is there anything that sticks out to us about just the age profile of your campus? You know, we looked at what we call the camel hump graph earlier that says different ages of construction. Well, that affects maintenance. We want to know, how does that affect your daily service organization? We want to look at mix of space. Do campuses like you have comparable types of facilities? Do I have too much compared with others, or am I underspaced? And finally, very, very important question is, you know, can I afford the space that I currently have? Sometimes a lack of maintenance funding and the lack of and the growth of facilities backlog is due to schools that grew too fast. And with declining enrollments in a lot of environments, it's really important to look at that very critically. Ultimately, what's important is that we validate this and we compare it to peer institutions. Some examples. We plot every school on that same graph that we looked at before. A school that has a lot of spaces in the pre-war era is very different than a school that has a lot of newer facilities. The capital needs are different. The daily service needs are different. It tells us a lot. We're looking at risk. Very simply, we break your different facilities into different categories in terms of risk. The buildings that are over 50 years old tend to have components that are past due for renewal, and failures are possible. Those are high-risk spaces. On the other hand, low-risk spaces, buildings under 10, have little capital requirement currently and are in what we call a honeymoon period, and there are groups in between as well. We want to know, is your campus in a riskier position than others? We talked about this a little bit earlier, but the pace of student enrollment growth versus the rate of space growth. Very important. Am I growing my campus at a rate that is faster than I'm growing my student body? Or is it the opposite? And then finally, we look at things like scale. And that is, do I have lots of smaller buildings? Is there the opportunity to consolidate? Because in our experience, an appropriately scaled campus is a generally more efficient one. After space, we look at capital investments. What do we collect? We're looking at historical project spending. We're looking at deferred maintenance assessments, R&R project list, any master plans that you might have, or looking at any construction costs that you might have. And why do we do that? Well, we want to answer a lot of core questions. Perhaps the most important one is, how much should I invest each year? Once we know that, has my past investment aligned with those needs? What are the conditions like on my campus as a result of that spending? And because of my spending, am I gaining or losing ground with respect to my backlog? We spend a lot of time on figuring out what an investment target is, and there are lots of methodologies out there, and we figure out one that's most appropriate for you. There is the industry standard of 3% replacement value. You can go a little bit more fine grain and determine what a life cycle need is of renewable components. But ultimately, we recommend discounting that to account for functional obsolescence, and that is, you don't need to steward facilities that you know you are going to ultimately replace or do major renovation in. So your target should actually be lower than what we would call equilibrium. Once we determine what that goal is, the question is, well, how is my spending compared to that goal? When I look at annual stewardship spending at this institution over the last years, I'm in a zone that is under my minimum needs. What that means is that I'm increasing backlog and I'm increasing risk. Excuse me. When I look at adding capital investment over that annual stewardship, you can see that. The good news is I get closer to that range. There are years when I am in the target range, but no years where I'm really making dents and going above that yellow line and increasing my net asset value. So not only do we look at you over time, but we look at how that reinvestment rate over the years compares with institutions like you. In this case, the institution that we're talking about on the left side is underspending on average every year as compared to the peer group of institutions. But we don't really stop there. Not only is it about how much money you're spending, but it's about what you're spending it on. So we break it down by package. We're looking at breaking that down by envelope, infrastructure, building mechanicals, safety code, and space renewal. Big into balance. And we want to be sure that your capital project investment is aligned with your needs over time. We see this over and over again where maintenance studies, typically call for mechanical spending or indicate that there are backlogs on the plumbing or electrical side that are critical to the performance of the building. And at the end of the day, when we look at a chart like this, most of the spending goes to space renewal. It's very important that you change the thinking, because those projects that renew space, even though they're important, are not the things that are going to prevent major failures from happening on your campus. And then ultimately, we want to show how there's a connection between annual stewardship spending and backlog at the institution. The less you keep up, the more you have to catch up. Last but not least, we look at the operations side. We are collecting things like facilities budget, staffing chart, trades, distribution, work order reporting, utility history, invoices, etc. Why? Well, we want to answer, is my budget allocated appropriately? Do I have an effective plan or preventative maintenance program? Am I efficiently staffed? Is that team supervised effectively? Are there opportunities to save money? And based on that, how well served does the community feel? Well, we have benchmarks and metrics that help us tell that story as well. We're looking at operating expenditures. We do a breakdown between daily service, just the cost of running the campus on a day-to-day basis, planned maintenance, which is more of course, planned life cycle projects, and utilities. We never rely on one benchmark to tell the story, and oftentimes when there are institutions that do that, when they focus on one metric, they oftentimes make the wrong conclusions from that metric. So everything that we do is presented in the context of several other metrics. In this case, we are looking at maintenance, and when we're telling the maintenance story, we're looking at staffing, supervision, materials, and work order output. Combined, that paints us a picture of what's happening with the maintenance function. We do the same thing for custodial, and we do the same thing for grounds as well. We are drilling down into work orders. We're not only saying how many are you doing, we're saying what type. When needed, we look at that by location. Are there particular hotspots on your campus that a simple capital project would free up hundreds of daily service hours a year? That's very important. And ultimately, all that affects utility consumption. We're benchmarking how much energy you use, and we're benchmarking how much it costs as well. We are looking at service, and it's threefold for us. We're looking at the process, we're looking at an inspection score, and we're looking at a customer survey. When we look at the process, we're looking at how are our work requests taken in, who can make requests, who schedules work, is that schedule communicated to the customer, and are customers kept aware of the status of their work? And we compare that across other institutions. The inspection score is a cursory inspection. We're really looking at the curb appeal, general repair, cleanliness, exterior condition, and mechanical spaces. We typically like to walk between 10 and 20% of the space on your campus in roughly a 3-hour tour. And then customer survey. We're looking at, are the expectations of the customer at that institution met? We're graphing that to figure out and help you pinpoint ways that you can better improve the perception of the department throughout the institution. So that gives you an overview of the process and the output of our discovery process. It doesn't stop there. I mentioned we have a suite of forward-looking predictive analytics that not only, now that you know where you've been and where you are, you have to ask the question, well, where are you going? What are the things that are going to affect me for years to come? So we have a suite of predictive analytics, for example, that look at capital needs going forward. It says, what is my current backlog? What's my projected investment? And what impact does that have on my 10-year capital forecast? It lets you model the impact of those investments. If you have a capital plan, what is that going to do to what we call the net asset value, or it's almost a reverse FCI at your institution? What does that do to the risk profile that we talked about earlier? And then finally, at the end of the day, what happens with my backlog over time? Another piece of our predictive analytics is new. It's what's called the cost forecaster. Once we have all of your capital and operating information on our member website, we give you the ability to actually model the impact of changes to your campus over time. If you have plans to add a new classroom facility, Cost Forecaster allows you to estimate the operating requirements and the capital needs for that space going forward. You can do the same thing for demolishing or removing spaces, and you can create and save numerous different scenarios based upon your actual data that we collect at your institution. This was actually just launched in January, and we're really excited about it. We also have performance analytics that not only help you develop a plan for particular metrics, but help monitor your progress towards those objectives. Our discovery process lets you or helps you determine what future objectives are and determine areas that you want to focus on. It triangulates on best-in-class institutions. Basically, what are the institutions that do what you want to improve very well? We set objectives and target what your ultimate performance should be, and we track your performance over time. One example is, here was an institution where a focus of theirs was daily service costs. They were concerned that their day-to-day maintenance expenses were going up over time. So working with them, we really drilled down to figure out what was driving those costs, and a very simple graph was developed based upon information from the work order system. What that did was target facilities that were driving daily service needs and looking at particular capital projects in their backlog list that would reduce those risks, free up those daily service resources to do more and more planned maintenance at the institution. So to bring it all together, we just walked through a process of discovery, prediction, and performance. The culmination of all of these three is what makes up our ROPA Plus process. Ultimately, what this does is drive results at an institution. We start on top with the most accurate data about your campus, a holistic 360-degree view of finance and facilities. The analysis, insight, benchmarking, sharing of best practices brings you facilities intelligence. That enables you to make data-driven decisions on your campus, lets you make the case for better policies regarding space, capital, and operations, and ultimately enables you to continually improve the campus and align it with mission and strategy.